Well, it's been an interesting conversation so far. I've really enjoyed it. One of the things that Steve Rockwood and I were just talking about, and I think this conference has made it, I've started thinking about it in my mind. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between some of the folks that are doing the management in the field, and I represent the municipal side, so working for the city of Orlando, most of these folks are state agency and federal agency level. And one of the things, the municipal side, we've got a lot of lakes and rivers and streams and ponds that we manage around the cities. And we're under pretty intense permit regulations, mainly through the NPDES permit requirements, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System that the EPA oversees. And so they set criteria that FDEP then comes to the cities and they say, you need to manage this stormwater pond and make sure that it doesn't overgrow with cattails. And and listening to Steve and some of the other presentations, there's things that we could be doing with those ponds to meet the goals and objectives of this group that aren't necessarily spelled out in our permits. In our permits, we're required to reduce nitrogen, reduce phosphorus inputs to ultimately the St. Johns River or the Indian River or wherever we're closest to or wherever our water system is discharging to. We've got to meet those requirements. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is maybe there's something we need to be doing and having this conversation to incorporate some broader goals and objectives into the way that we're managing all these smaller wetlands. We're seeing habitat loss all over the place. Well, we're creating habitat in a lot of areas, and especially listening to the mottled ducks, how we've got some that are living in the urban environment. Well, maybe we need to start taking a look at that, and maybe there's things we could do to help that. I don't know. Maybe that we don't want to do that. But I think there's not a lot of conversation between those two groups. And so I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about today.
In all honesty, I'm not sure where to start, and I'm not sure where to finish. But I'll say this. The issues that were brought up today, and I think some really good information, are things that you as stakeholders and members of the public have got to be compelled to have questions about or want answers to. And with that said, I'm happy to work the dialogue here, but again, I think these are issues that hopefully, the interest has piqued you today about what you've seen, and help us get the dialogue started here. And there's a lot of expertise here, and I think we can answer a lot of questions. I know there were questions.
Anybody on the panel want to address anything that either Mark or Peter?
As an employee of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, it's what I do as a research biologist is driven, well, first of all, by our management side, Jamie's side. They have questions that need answered, and we devise on the research side then research to try to answer those questions. Well, ultimately, though, what we do with the data and the understanding that we gain from our research, it's up to the people of Florida in the end to say, what we do with that information, how we apply it on the ground. As a professional, of course, I have my thoughts and things about how we should apply the data, but nothing can get done on the state side because I'm a public employee without the go-ahead from you all, the stakeholders. So it's kind of going along the same lines as what you were saying. It's really driven by you all out there, what you think are priorities for and what you see happening around you in your environment. And you being here today, shows that you're interested, whether you're a state employee as well or a federal employee or just a duck hunter, and I don't want to just say just a duck hunter, but a stakeholder out there. You need to, by being here, you've shown an interest in these types of things. And so we need to hear from you, how you want our information and our gaining of understanding of what's going on in these different systems, how you want us to deal with this. How important is this? We're not going to. A lot of the support we get comes from grassroots levels. If the public isn't saying something, isn't needing something, isn't wanting something, it's not going to happen at the state or the federal level many times. So, it's a struggle for us I know for me anyway, to find support a lot of times for what needs to happen. And it really all needs to come from you all. So if you've got questions about, getting involved, even more than you are today, and what it takes, that's part of it. Is I see a big problem is so much apathy out there today. Amongst the citizens of this state and of this country, if it's not directly affecting them, one thing I heard from several people is it takes a crisis these days to get action. And that's just not the way you want to go. If we can get action well before the crisis, be proactive, it's obviously a much better situation. But that's what it seems to take. So much apathy out there until it directly affects a bunch of people. And then action comes, but is that action going to be perpetuated much into the future at all? And that's really up to you all out there. Do what we can on this end. But put your questions in the box, get us started on this stuff and give us some direction. I get direction from inside, but we need direction from the outside as well. So,
since we're talking about getting stakeholders involved, that's kind of a pet subject of mine, because when I started Orca, I think I had the naive view, build it and they will come. Build it and, people realize that we need to be monitoring these things in order to, just like when you go into an emergency room and the doctors slap monitors all over to you to figure out what's wrong and to figure out if what they're doing is making you better or worse. That's what we need to be doing with our life support systems. And I realized that people aren't getting that there's this disconnect. And actually, the Packard Foundation did a study on this about the disconnect between knowledge and action. And the problem is that science is a very methodical, plodding process, and it moves very slowly. And we as scientists produce publications, and they go on a library shelf somewhere. And most scientists feel like, well, they've done their job. They've informed. It's out there in the public, and that's it. Meanwhile, policy is going on, usually on a deadline, under controversy, and nobody's looking at those papers. And so what the Packard Foundation did was look at, how do you bridge that gap? And they looked at situations where the gap had been bridged, and they actually got the stakeholders involved. And the key in most of those situations was to actually get the stakeholders involved in collecting the data. When the stakeholders were working with the scientists to collect the data, that was the thing that actually made the difference in terms of bridging the gap. And so it's a question of making the public and the stakeholders, better informed about these ecosystems and what they mean. And actually, one thing we're trying to do in that regard is with the Kilroys, we're working on a project this year to bring the Kilroy data directly into all of the classrooms in Indian River County. And we're creating videos and tutorials so that the kids can actually work with the real-time data, which is the closest thing we can come to. I'd like to get all those kids out in the field, and actually we have done that, but that's very costly, and there's liability issues, so this is the next best thing.
Okay, I'm going to come to you with the microphone. So
I can project. We had a little discussion today about exotics. The lionfish is destroying our fisheries in the reefs. We've got lygodium growing all over our Everglades. We've got more cichlids, and we've got traditional fish. We danced around a little bit. Tom mentioned the Melaleuca control operation. Steve talked about getting rid of some of this stuff. Are our wetlands at serious threat from being overrun by exotics? So it doesn't matter whether or not we preserve them, they suddenly become a different kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, that's sorry. That's a great question and a very timely one. And I think the fear is always yes, that could happen. And controlling these exotics is number one costly, but also very unwieldy. Now, one thing that's been identified recently, and somewhat of an action has been taken, is there was a realization that people are so committed to, in this particular case, restoring America's Everglades, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. That program did a pretty good job of addressing exotics. Now, it didn't have the resources to actually deal with the problem. But the epiphany that was had several months ago is that it's not necessarily an Everglades problem. It's, in this case, a state problem. It could be a regional problem. The group of people that were working on battling and dealing with invasives and exotics were so small and really only covered a certain geographic area, and that was essentially the Everglades protection area. So what stakeholders realized, and what I don't want to go in too much detail here, but the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force, which is sort of an umbrella organization that coordinates science and a lot of other aspects of restoration, what they were charged with doing, what they gave a charge to the broader ecosystem players, is develop a strategic action framework on how to integrate various different agencies throughout the state, federal and state, and also start talking to localities on how to tackle the invasives issue. And not so much how to tackle it, but how to coordinate and synchronize your efforts so that you can best address it. So I think it's, to a large extent, a resource thing, but also a knowledge aspect too. And this has been a phenomenal effort. Right now it is just a framework, but it's pulled in folks from Department of Homeland Security. We have folks from Miami Zoo playing a role in it. And really it's a matter of taking all the resources you have and massing them on the things that really matter, and having an impact. So that's a long answer to your question, but invasives are a problem and can continue to be catastrophic. But the steps, I think, are moving in the right direction to get a better handle on it.
I think everybody's done a great job today presenting from diverse backgrounds, kind of a unified direction and support for our wetlands, recognition that everybody wants improved wetlands for the health of Florida, for duck hunting, for the ecosystem, everything else. I was just curious, hearing some response from the different panel members about the Florida Department of Agriculture. How is that impacting you all from your own perspectives in terms of funding, and is there possible conflicting goals? Here we're talking about taking citrus out of production so we can convert it to wetlands. But, on the political front, you open up the paper and everyone wants to create jobs, grow things in Florida, get the economy, get jobs back for people. I could see that as being a possible conflict for what we're trying to achieve here today, and just kind of curious if their Department of Agriculture is working with us, or are they from a funding and a political standpoint, or is it something that y'all are battling? How's that play into it?
The St. Johns River Water Management District has had a long-term history with the local citrus growers, particularly since citrus is what you mentioned. With regard to the Department of Agriculture, I don't know that we have a direct connection with dealings with the Department of Agriculture. I can tell you, though, that with the inception of the Upper St. Johns River Basin project, that all the area that was acquired for that project was done by willing sellers, with a very, very small exception. We had to do almost no eminent domain acquisitions for the Upper Basin project. So when the district went forward in the planning process of the Upper Basin project, and we went to the local ag growers, quite honestly, at the beginning, they laughed us out of the room. They said, "You want to do what with our citrus?" But when we persisted and showed them the science, presented our case that the agricultural practices that they were involved in were destroying the river, slowly we got buy-in. And now the local citrus growers in Indian River County and Brevard County are one of our strongest partners. So there is a balance to be struck between agriculture and restoration. We do have to find that balance, and I believe in the Upper Basin we've done it.
We've, Fish and Wildlife Commission years ago collaborated with Department of Agriculture on a project down in the Everglades agricultural area. It was, for those of you familiar with the Lake Harbor public waterfowl area, this was a collaborative project in which we were trying to provide alternatives for the sugar industry down in the EAA, and we actually looked at a project that went on for, I don't know, 10, 12 years, I suspect. It was a rice crawfish polyculture, and we worked with our Department of Agriculture, who provide the crawfish for us, and worked with our growers. It was a piece of state land that was owned, it was maybe 640 acres right on the Miami Canal, and we entered a cooperative agreement with a grower. I believe it was Duda, and Duda managed a crop. Okeelana? Thank you. Okeelana, who managed a crop for us and managed a crawfish, and anyhow. So is Mark Azelson still out there? Anybody from Scientific Services, FWC? I'm going to take a shot at answering the other half of this question dealing with Department of Agriculture. And our Scientific Services Division does a lot of work with them, and recently we've been working collaboratively with them and developing best management practices for a lot of the various growing operations, agricultural operations that are out there, and these are specific best management practices as they relate to fish and wildlife habitat. And I know we've been in the process of developing those VMPs. I'm not sure where we are with that. I see Claire, are you shaking your head? Are you familiar? But that's to that extent that I know that we're doing with that. So in terms of collaboration with DAX, that's about all I can offer up.
Okay, I'm going to go to one of the, you got one? Oh, let me do this one first, Dennis, and then I'll come back to you. All right, so there's a question in the box. Ad valorem taxes are collected by the water management districts to help implement water storage and treatment projects. For example, STAs are built in South Florida to treat water before it goes into the Everglades, yet no projects occur at the headwaters of the Kissimmee River on the Kissimmee chain of lakes. And I know nobody's here from South Florida Water Management District, but the question is, how can we get more dollars distributed throughout the whole basin and not just South Florida? I don't know, maybe Hector, I know you can't speak for South Florida, but I'm thinking, a lot of your projects are in headwaters and not the outflow, whereas South Florida's kind of got it opposite. They've got more of their projects on the outflow versus the headwaters. So,
well, the issue of ad valorem taxes, that's a touchy one, I know. But as far as St. John's is concerned, the ad valorem taxes that we collect a lot of times do go toward specific projects that we deem are necessary and beneficial for the environment and for the district. We have every year we go through the process of identifying our 5-year strategic plan. We have teams of organized in working teams, and we all throw out projects that are important to the district, and then those projects are classified and prioritized, because we recognize that we can't do every project that we want. We'd love to, but we don't. So as far as using ad valorem taxes to identify what projects we're going to work on, we really rely on that strategic planning process to hit the projects that we feel are the most important for the district first, because we feel they're the most important for the district. We do, however, do a pretty good job of leveraging ad valorem taxes with a lot of outside funding. Not so much in the very recent past, but in previous years when we had P2000, Florida Forever, and those kinds of funding streams, many of our very large-scale restoration projects were funded with those types of outside funding streams. We've enjoyed a very long-standing partnership with the Corps for the Upper Basin project, which is no small project. So to answer the question as to how we can get projects here or there with ad valorem funding, really the process that we use is the strategic plan, and we look at those projects and we rank them as to how we feel they fall out in importance.
I might ask Steve to address it from the FWC side, and being aquatic habitat enhancement. How do you guys go about choosing which of your enhancement projects get funded?
Our funding for our program is a little bit different in that it's not ad valorem, but it is funds generated from documentary stamps. These are fees associated with real estate transactions. So if there's any financial transaction associated with buying real estate, there is a fee, a documentary stamp fee that you have to pay, and that doc stamp fee is 1% of that transaction amount. Funding for the program that I oversee, we receive 1/4% of funding for that program, and that money must be used specifically to, let me back up. That money can be used to restore and enhance freshwater wetland habitat, with the caveat that it's got to be on freshwater and it must have public access. And how we go about deciding on which projects to fund and which projects not to fund is we've established a team of what we, for lack of a better term, subject matter experts. These, we have fisheries biologists, we have waterfowl biologists, we have alligator biologists, and then we have project managers and project leaders. It's a team of about 15 folks. And we have a funding application that you submit that we rank and score, and the team meets, discusses, ranks, and scores these projects, and then we take it up to Tallahassee, where it goes through a secondary level of review. And basically, we prioritize those projects and we start funding projects and work our way down the list until we run out of money. So that pretty much explains that program.
I'd like to first off say thank you very much to the panel for spending your time with us today and sharing your information and your research. My question is more on the waterfowl side. With the advancement of the vagrant species of black-bellied whistling duck through the peninsula of Florida, it's moved up into the central part of the state pretty predominantly now, and it's overlapping with wood ducks. I believe, and I've polled other folks in my area, other hunters in my area, that it at times is, I believe, displacing our native wood ducks by potential of the overlap of the breeding and the fact that both of them are cavity nesters. Now, we know black-bellies also nest on the ground, but they'll nest in cavities as well. Do you think that there's any attention that needs to be given to this? I mean, the picture that was up there showed two black-bellies with a whole lot of little ones behind them. So that there are prolific breeders, and do you think that they could potentially cause an extirpation of wood ducks in specific areas where their habitats are going to overlap? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'm going to give it to Ron first.
Good question. First, those were fulvous whistling ducks, by the way, in the picture. But anyway, same difference with blackbellies, though. We know so very little about this bird in Florida. It's such a new arrival. It really is. I mean, the last 15 years. And like I said, science is applauding. It takes a long time sometimes to do science and research. And with the limited amount of funding and personnel and stuff that we have in FWC, I'm basically the waterfowl research biologist. Been concentrating on mottle ducks for a long time. Getting close to the end of that, absolutely. I mean, black bellies have piqued the interest of not just me and Jamie and Steve and everybody else that's been involved in waterfowl and wetlands in FWC for a long time, but also many other states in the southeast now are really starting to garner an interest in this bird. It has all the information we have is basically just ancillary at this point. I mean, it's just from our observations, talking to people like you've talked to, because we have not really done any research on this bird here. We're starting. It's getting a foothold. We're starting in different states now to put colored leg bands on these birds, starting to get some information, some rudimentary information on movement patterns and things like that of these birds. So it's starting. It's definitely starting, and I do see more attention being paid to this species because it's such a unique, it seems from what I've done actually a lot of observation of this species myself, and again, it's not at all hard research or data, but they're unique. These birds are different in many respects. They are not obligate cavity nesters like wood ducks are. I've seen them nesting in the tops of cabbage palms. I've seen them on the ground. I've seen them suspended in thick grasses. I've seen them in cavities. They'll use boxes. So the potential is there. We've seen them with broods, like now. I've seen brand new broods of black-bellied whistling ducks on Thanksgiving. These are little pinheads just hatched on Thanksgiving. You know, you don't see that with wood ducks. You don't see that with mottle. You know, there are other breeding waterfowl, the few species we have in the state of Florida. These birds are different. It doesn't seem like they molt. All waterfowl in general go through a synchronous wing molt. So they become flightless for about a month. These birds do not wing molt at the same time as our mottle ducks do, for example. They move to their wintering areas first and then they molt, it seems. So these are just examples of how this bird is really different. And so we need to pay attention. It's just a matter of funding and personnel and stuff to do this, but it's starting. And I'm super interested personally in this bird. I know our hunters have really, quickly become maybe not enamored with them, but they become valuable part of the avifauna of the state very, very quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd love to jump on a bunch of stuff right now because I've got a lot of questions just like you do, but like I said, it takes time and it takes money. I really want to, I'm so close to finishing up a lot of stuff we've been doing with mottle ducks for a long time. And then maybe that's it. Maybe it's on to black bellies if that's what Jamie and the higher ups on the management side deem is necessary, and I think it kind of is. I mean, Jamie, right? You've been in contact with the folks in other states, with this colored leg banding stuff that's going on. I mean, one little bit of data. We just found a bird in Central Florida that was leg banded a couple weeks ago up in North Carolina.
Yeah, this is how much we don't understand this bird.
Yeah.
July 1st. South Carolina DNR banded, put some color leg bands on some black belly whistling ducks that they captured on the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. So, sort of southern South Carolina. That bird was, a photograph of that bird of one of those birds was taken in Loretta, Florida, just on the north shore of Lake Ostopoga this past weekend.
Yeah.
So what business does a duck have flying from southern South Carolina down to central Florida? It's a pretty long distance.
So it's going to winter down here, Jamie. It's getting cold.
So
it's midsummer. It's getting cold up there.
That's how much we don't understand these birds. I couldn't explain to you why that happened. Those birds should be getting ready to molt. That's what we would. That's what we would think at this time of year, but.
That's a big movement for a bird that if you'd asked me, how I think black bellies move around in Florida, from an area that I know where they nest, they'll nest and they'll raise their brood, and then once the brood is fledged, that area becomes basically they leave. And it's getting either toward winter, late fall, into winter, so they go to their wintering area. But then not too long after that, that area will have blackbellies on it again. And my thinking was, well, we're getting this hopscotch thing going on where these birds, wherever they are, move south a little bit, not necessarily very far, my thinking was, to winter. Well, these birds that were just up here then during the breeding season, well, they moved just that far down to winter, which was the place where the other ones nested. So that's what I was kind of getting this feeling that these birds are just kind of, they do migrate south to winter, but not necessarily very far. Now we've got this bird from South Carolina in the middle of summer, moving all the way from down to Florida, to Istapoga. I mean, central Florida, central peninsular Florida. Wow. I don't know. And we may find out that there may not be any pattern to what these birds do. But again, we just don't know. And so the obvious concern is with wood ducks. But there are potentially some concerns even with competition with mottle ducks and things like that. So the thing that really is unbelievable is some of those brood sizes that you see. These birds are prolific from what we can tell. Do they have more than one brood in a year? We're seeing these broods in late November. But did that pair already bring off a brood from what we would consider a more typical nesting period here in Florida of maybe April and May? But we don't see a lot of broods then. But we do see broods, during our banding times and stuff like that, which is now. So, wow, lots of questions. But hopefully we will be able to start answering some of these. Yep.
I just want to add on, in 2003 at the Orlando Wetlands Park, which is right along the St. Johns River there, along State Road 50, we saw the first pair of black-bellied whistling ducks. This last, just few months ago, we had about 500 of them. And I mean, it's just been explosive to see the growth and to see these things take over. And so I second y'all's notion, they need to be studied more.
And just to add to that, one of the things, as we've all heard as part of this discussion, is when we think about waterfowl and what we know about waterfowl populations and their waterfowl biology, their breeding patterns, their molting patterns, their nesting patterns, it's all based on temperate ducks in North America. These are South American ducks. These are ducks that they've been in the tropics all their life. So everything that we know about tropical birds and tropical plants, biology of that is there is no particular pattern. It's getting back to some of the stuff that I've talked about earlier with some of these plants that are coming up. They're used to this continuous 12 hours of photo period of 12 hours. So all of these patterns are all thrown out. You look at deer populations and you look at antler development down in South American countries, and there is no pattern. It's continuous throughout the year. So in terms of the observations and what we're seeing and some of these breeding patterns and their migration patterns and their molting patterns, it's all over the board.
Okay.
One of the things I've had an opportunity as a duck hunter to do over the many years is to hunt in impounded wetlands, all from the storm treatment areas to quite a few different impoundments here in Brevard County and the area. And in a lot of cases, those areas have been relatively new. And in other words, they had a hard bottom, when we first started hunting them, and sandy hard bottom, and they were always really good places to hunt when they had a sandy hard bottom, and in general. And during Hector, during your or during Bill's presentation on the C1 Sawgrass Lakes area, they had a 90% reduction in nutrients running through the system, and Mark, presented on the Orlando Easterly Wetlands in the first year, did a presentation on that, and you go to many of these places now, and they have mucky bottoms now, and just a general question about, how that affects their ability to retain the nutrients, to remove the nutrients, and what kind of things need to be done, what kind of things can be done, and if there are any ideas on how to do restoration with regards to restoring their ability to trap nutrients.
This is a really hard one. We just finished up a big study where we took some of these impounded areas, and as those mucky soils have been laid down over the years that wetland has been in operation, as you allow those soils to dry up, which is a good thing. You heard in Steve's talks, disturbance is a great thing, and I really believe in that. And I think that's part of our problem with our lakes, rivers, and streams, because in our effort to control, provide for flood protection and all these things, we a lot of times will keep these water levels at a certain stage. And on all of our lakes in an urban setting, water managers want to keep those levels, because when the guy's dock is exposed and his boat is hanging out of the water, he's mad. So the commissioners and the folks are calling the water managers to get the water levels up. But that's doing a detriment to those lakes, rivers, and streams, because it's not allowing those mucky soils to oxidize. When those mucky soils oxidize, it releases nutrients. So now you've got issues from those folks who are looking at these water bodies from a water quality standpoint. And so there's some real issues in dealing with that. Muck removal is extremely expensive. But that's one of the things that we found in our wetland system that resets that clock. And we have found through all of our testing, we've looked at a lot of different things. We've looked at adding different metals like aluminum to bind up the phosphorus and to do different things. We've looked at removing the muck. Is that the best avenue? We've looked at drying it and oxidizing it. Is that the best avenue for water quality? What we found is that the muck removal seems to be our absolute best avenue for resetting the clock. And like you said, the first few years following is when you get your best wildlife, because it's a new system at that point. So everything is coming in, and biodiversity goes way up. And so all those things are good, but it's extremely expensive. And so, I think we really need to look at some of the hard questions of balancing water quality issues, and maybe sometimes we need to allow some of these nutrients to flow. Now that's a bad thing to talk about for any water quality manager, because most of us are tied to permit conditions that we all have to meet. And so we don't dare want to exceed those limits. But in nature, that's what happened naturally when these systems would dry out and the sediments would oxidize. So sometimes I wonder if we're not shooting ourselves in the foot by some of our management practices.
Hey, Mark, I was just to follow up on that. It just got me thinking. So what if, do you think perhaps the water quality issues wouldn't be there if we did a more frequent drawdowns on these systems? So like, say, instead of going 15 or 20 years without the system going dry or drier. I mean, we don't have to have an extreme low event, but if it happened more on a 3 to 5 to maybe 8-year cycle, that we could get both the good habitat and still have decent water quality without things going through the roof if we had more frequent dry cycles or drawdowns within our water systems.
That's one of the things we were talking about earlier today, and I don't know that I have a good answer for you, but I think it is certainly, you heard Steve talk about 6 to 8 weeks after the disturbance that those nutrients were kind of reassimilated into the system. Well, that works perfectly if it's not a flowing system. If you can impound the water and hold it and allow that 6 to 8 week time, and that's about what we've seen as well, you can reassimilate those nutrients. And so I think that absolutely what you're suggesting is a good thing that we should be striving for. But one of the things that we're finding is once you get to a certain level of muck, or if it gets to a certain depth, it's nearly impossible to dry it out with a very extended, long dry period. And so that's one of the issues that we wrestle with. But I think the demucking projects that we've done recently, I think that's one of the things that we would like to look at, is doing kind of a shorter duration dry down period, maybe go in there and do some disking to help oxidize and to speed up the oxidation of that organic material, and then rehydrate it and see if that does help. I think that's a really interesting thing, and I think that's one of the things we'll be looking at in the future to hopefully do some more studies and see if that does pan out. I think it would.
When you have a demuck program, where does the muck go?
We'll ask, I want to get you an answer.
Just to follow up on some things that Mark was saying that I think is really important too, is that when we look at what's happened to our floodplain marshes, a lot of the muck that's being deposited in these lakes normally would be deposited in the floodplain marshes during the flooding periods, so you have this rainfall that comes down into the basin, and during the rainy season, the basin fills up. These floodplain marshes fill up, and as the water level increases, that sediment and that muck gets deposited up on the upper reaches of the floodplain marshes. And when the water recedes, it's left up there and it comes back down. But we've channelized a lot of our rivers, and we've provided an avenue for these nutrients to flow down. And where do they go? It goes right down the channel and it goes into lakes. So our lakes are really essentially acting as giant sinks to receive a lot of this. On top of that, you have all the exotics and all the invasive plants and all those other issues, and you've got homeowners and septic systems that are all furthermore add to it. So it's a really complicated mess. To get to your question about where does the muck go, there is some in-lake disposal islands that are created where some of that can get deposited. Although I think that's primarily more really pertaining to aquatic vegetation. But typically we look for places to deposit the spoil, and we look for homeowners, or we look for farmers or ranchers who would receive that, and we work out agreements with them. And this is one of the reasons why demucking an area is so expensive, because it's not only to get it out, but then you're going to have to transport it somewhere. And
isn't it just creating a situation where you're moving a nutrient load from one point to another point? It seems to me like that's a septic tank nightmare.
Well,
I've got a septic tank that drains into my soil that then leaches into the river.
It kind of is. And I see Marty holding his hand up out there, and we're going to let him address it too. There's several different ways that we handle this. Obviously we have to do a lot of testing of the muck before we can take it and put it up, and before you as a willing landowner would be willing to receive it, you want to have some assurance that you're not getting any contaminants in there. That's something that you will be willing to accept in your crop. We build containment reservoirs where we can build a reservoir, we pump all the muck into that reservoir, we let the water flow out of it, and then we either haul the muck away after it dries up or whatever. So there's several different ways we can skin that cat. And each area is different. We have hydraulic dredge. Sometimes we can draw down a reservoir and we can scrape and load the stuff and put it in trucks and haul it away. So those are the two primary methods that I'm aware of demucking lakes, either hydraulically or drawing the lake down and pushing it in piles and hauling it somewhere. Marty, did you want to tackle this?
Just to add to that. Okay, my name is Marty Mann. I'm with the Fish and Wildlife Commission. We built 29 in-lake disposal islands on Lake Toho, and one of the concerns was that pesticides would then be able to be leached out or become a nutrient point source once we piled it up. And we had the University of Florida look at that over a 3-4 year study, and doing all the water sampling around them for 3 or 4 years, and found that it was not a point source in any way. So it was a way of putting it all in a pile if we didn't have upland disposal. And then we actually improved the water quality because we trapped it all there. It didn't leach out over a 4 year period. So that was kind of addressed in the short term, and wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Thank you.
Let me also add. In our situation, the muck, we're looking at. We've taken that and we've basically put it in an upland area. It's dried and it's broken down over time, and it really looks like a good topsoil product. And so we've got some soil companies that are interested in taking that and using it as a non-structural fill for roadway projects, golf courses. One of the things that I had a soil guy tell me about was that the golf course industry has really been getting dinged, obviously with the use of fertilizers and nitrates particularly making their way to our water bodies, and it's because they put those golf courses on sand. Well, one of the mandates, and I don't know anything about golf course regulations, but I've heard that they are being encouraged, if not regulated, to begin to add more organics to those soils underneath golf courses. And so that's a potential for us to have a market. And so that's one of the things we're actually looking at. And we've got a contract that's kind of in limbo right now with a soil company where they're going to start buying our soil. So if we're actually able to demuck and create a product that we can then turn around and sell, that helps offset that wetland restoration project.
I just wanted to address that, create a product that you can sell, because we did a project called Just Add Water with some of the Central Florida farmers about the idea of water ranching and holding water on their land. And one of the farmers I talked to was really pissed off because somebody had sold him a bill of goods about using biosolids on his land as a way to get nutrients for cheap. And his land was now contaminated. It was useless. And one of the issues is testing for everything. I mean, literally everything. The muck is a huge problem, and we're not putting any intelligent science into it, as far as I can tell. Nothing about removing it. We use very primitive techniques for dredging. No real intelligent efforts at engineering a better way to do that, I think. And then the whole point of muck is what's going on in the microbial community, and that's hugely complex. And I think we have the scientific capability now of actually being able to figure that out and going a long way towards addressing these issues in a more intelligent fashion, and figuring out what it's going to take this anaerobic community, turn it into an aerobic community, have the right microbes there to help, speed up the breakdown and all of those things. But as far as I know, there's not really much effort being put into that yet. Yeah.
And she's right. I should have clarified, because we have spent a lot of money doing priority pollutant scans and looking at that muck, and it's very clean. It has no stormwater runoff. So it's kind of a little bit different situation. Most of our lakes in the city of Orlando, as they get dredged and demucked, I would say almost all of those, the muck is not suitable for use anywhere except for probably in a landfill where those pollutants can be captured and treated in an appropriate manner. So
I think let me bookend the muck discussion with a pretty relevant example. I believe the state legislature just earmarked $20 million for muck removal from the Indian River Lagoon. And this is something that has been identified as a strategy to improve water quality in the long term. And indeed, they have been active with projects for, I guess, a decade or two now. And let me give you an example, and I think I can directly answer your question about why they remove it and then what is the fate of it. And I'll give you the example of Turkey Creek in Palm Bay. It's in the central Indian River Lagoon. And the idea behind removing the muck in the first place was we heard about C1 today. It's about a 300 square mile watershed. And over the past 50 to 80 years, we've had so much topsoil run off the land from development and such that the lower portion of the Turkey Creek system had 15 feet of muck. And when that system was surveyed back in the turn of the century, it was about 15 feet deep. And so they got down, they removed the muck down to the sand layer in order to, number one, try to restore the Indian River Lagoon, but the creek. But the larger issue was to create a trap so that we still have 300 square miles of watershed that periodically we may have to discharge into. But the idea is that you create the trap for the sediments and they'll fill in. So instead of in the future having to dredge the whole lagoon, you can fill the trap and then remove it again. In terms of the fate of the muck, as Steve said, up the railroad track from Turkey Creek, the district bought a large piece of property, and I believe it was a 13-acre impoundment. And you got to consider that that muck is like 90% water. So they literally suck it out with a dredge and they send it through with a pipe. There's no digging. So once they send it to the impoundment, there's a very long-term dewatering process that has to happen. And to answer your question a little bit more, as that system dewaters, there's rain going in there, and the sediments are falling out. They actually did remove a supernate and the water off the top, and I believe I don't want to talk too much about this. I don't want to indict anybody, but they directional drilled under US 1 and sent some of that water out, and we did notice some algal blooms. And so, to Edie's point, we haven't been very good about managing the contents of these lagoons that house muck. And indeed, the larger issue is, if we really want to remove nutrients from the system, we probably need to do something on site. And indeed, I think the idea that the technology here is certainly very good, because we're very good at treating wastewater lagoons. We do aeration and anoxic basins, and indeed the methods are there to deal with nutrients in these systems rather than drawing off water somewhere else. High organic matter system that hasn't been denitrified or nitrified, and removing the nitrogen before we truck it and send it somewhere else. So I just want to address those issues about why they dig in the first place or dredge, and then some issues with the fate, and give you an example of how these things were dealt with.
I have a question. I've often been concerned what we've done to our lakes and waterways by putting locks and dams and stopping our natural flushing of our lakes and not letting nature rise and lower our waterways naturally. I know I was raised on Lake Griffin, and when we don't get any rain, because of the people that live on the lake, they want to get their boats in and out or whatever, and I understand that. But they will maintain the level of the lakes to satisfy them, and I think they're going against nature. That lake is, when we don't get any rain, literally turns to a coffee color, stagnant water, and the fishing gets terrible. I just wonder if we just tore out every lock and dam, let nature take its way, and let it flush itself as nature calls for, and I think it would take care of itself personally.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the panelists on your talks and your discussion here. One thing that I was amazed at, and I've just arrived at the Indian River Lagoon, and about 6 months ago, and I was amazed that we had septic tanks here, where we have 10 feet or less to groundwater. We have very sandy soils. We have a high, very high precipitation rate. And basically, with these septic tank drain fields, we're just flushing the toilet into the groundwater. And I'm wondering how we educate people into the fact that we need advanced wastewater treatment in the area in order to control this nutrient, one of the nutrient sources.
I'll speak to that, just, and anyone else can chime in as they wish. There was a standing knowledge about the way we manage the land and the water in the state going back historically, and I think we all admit that. We saw examples today of where there were things that we thought worked in the past, and clearly they didn't. And I believe septic tanks are another example. And I believe also there was change in understanding in the early 80s that we could not, sit septic tanks into the Vado zone, groundwater come up and into the effluent field and then deliver it into our groundwaters and surface waters. So indeed, the code for placement of septic tanks changed. But your point is well taken. We had a lot of development in the state before 1983. But then another important issue is that we still have a lot of diffuse growth in this state. And the question is, if we don't have the ability to have centralized sewage treatment because we're building out into the suburbs in a larger way than we ever did, what are the options for decentralized wastewater treatment? And I think you've made a good point. A system that didn't work decades ago is probably not going to work. And again, I know there have been advancements. You see the use of turkey mounds. The code is much higher now for septic tank systems, and indeed, I think what we're going to see in the future, and this technology is available, and that is for advanced wastewater treatment of septic systems. And you can set up aerobic and anaerobic treatment at the end, and then get some high level of nitrogen and phosphorus removal. So those are the hopes in the future. These things cost more, so there's a reluctance by the developers, I think, to accept or even advocate this because it just puts up the cost of a home. If a traditional septic tank is $3,000, one with AWT is going to be $10,000 or $12,000. So as a society, and are we willing and ready to make those decisions to accept a higher cost as individuals to treat? And those are important issues. But I think the state is obviously cognizant of the problems with septic tanks. They've done better by getting the code better in terms of where they should be placed. But I think there's a lot more work to be done with them. And your point's well taken. For the longer term, we have to do better.
Anybody else? Okay. I just had a couple more questions from one of the that was in the box, and these aren't broader scale type of questions. These are specific questions to some of the speakers. For Mr. Herrera, and I just want to make sure that we get these out there. Is the Ocklawaha Basin included in the upper St. Johns River Basin? Or not basin, but the upper St. Johns River. Is
it is not. The Ocklawaha Basin is its own hydrologic unit. So it is hydraulically unique and separated from the Upper St. Johns. Now they do come together down at just south of Palatka. It comes into the Lower St. Johns, but as far as part of the Upper St. Johns, no, the two are not hydrologically or hydraulically connected at all.
And hold the microphone, because this one was actually for Maurice Sterling, but you might be able to answer the questions. Does the plan include management for T&E species, large predators, connectivity improvements? That's, sort of a vague question to me, but thinking about,
Okay, as Maurice would say, I don't understand the question.
Okay. I can only give you what's on the paper. So
read the question again for me,
please. It said, does the plan include management for T&E species, large predators, connectivity improvements? And his talk was about the. Yeah.
I'm afraid I couldn't answer that. I'm sorry.
And then, can anybody answer this question about Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge? Is the refuge managed for game fish at all? Because I know the Merritt Island folks took off already. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we addressed the questions. I don't have any more. Does anybody have any last-minute thoughts that they want to get out?
I would like to say something pertaining to this gentleman's question here about the Lake Griffin and the Ocklawaha and the dams that we have there. Shortly after I came to work for the district, one of the projects that I worked with was identifying alternative regulation schedules for Ocklawaha lakes. Each one of the Ocklawaha lakes is regulated by its own outlet structure, and those outlet structures are regulated as prescribed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and I believe it's the Four River Basins project that identifies how each one of those structures is operated. we recognized very early that stabilized lake levels were not good for those lakes. So we went into this process of doing a lot of science, doing a lot of research in how to operate those structures so that we could incorporate more of a vertical fluctuation in those lakes. We spent several years doing that. Finally got our ducks in a row.
Nice, good.
Wow, nothing on that, really? And we went public with these things, and we thought that we really had the answer on how to operate these structures so that we could get more vertical regulation schedule. Well, I was on the team that did the analysis on impacts to navigation. So the first couple of team members, they would go up and they talk about how wonderful the effects of the lakes would be in terms of water quality, littoral shelf enhancement, aquatic vegetation that would happen, and then the corresponding habitat improvement for fisheries. So they gave all the good news, and then it was my turn to go up and tell me, well, but it's also going to cost you in how many days a week or a year or a month that you won't be able to use your boat. And that's when everything fell apart. So I guess the bottom line is that there has to be education. There has to be a will of the public to accept that things are going to be a little different than what they've been used to, because those lakes have been regulated like that for decades. And a certain number of people, particularly the boating public, are used to being able to get out there and put their boats in and use their boats whenever they choose to. There was one group that I asked them point blank, are you not willing to sacrifice one day a month of not being able to use your boat in order to be able to enhance the vertical fluctuation of the lake? And the answer was no, they were not willing. So there's a lot of political will that needs to be worked to be able to incorporate and implement projects like that.
I got a question for the audience. Does anybody else know anything about snow geese that poop bioluminescent poop? The gentleman that said it left, and I never got to get any more information. Anybody else? I got a room full of waterfowlers. Somebody must know something about this. The snow geese. He said that snow geese have glowing feces, and that's how they actually know where to put the decoys or the traps or something.
How they know where to hunt, yeah.
Anybody else know anything about that?
I've seen it, but I can only assume it is phosphorescence and mineral.
And do snow geese, are they freshwater, or are they saltwater, or both?
Mostly fresh.
Mostly.
Depends on where they are.
Okay.
I mean, on the Gulf Coast of Texas, they do a lot of grubbing in the salt marshes for corner grass.
Okay, so that's probably where they pick it up.
But it's not always, it doesn't always phosphoresce.
Right.
You can't see goose poop on the ground, whether it's glowing or not.
Yeah. Right.
You need to open your eyes. It doesn't have to glow to see goose poop if the snow geese are using a field.
So, but I think he was saying maybe it was in the water, or was it in the field? That's what I wasn't.
No, in the field.
It was in the field.
In the field and in the water.
I've seen that, what was talking about, but not very often. You know, maybe once in a couple of, you go 3 or 4 trips, you might see it one time. Not a
Okay.
I think there
Thank
was a
you.
nuclear plant near where they were hunting too, wasn't there? Yeah, that's exactly right. So.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, I'd like to thank everyone who was willing to come and speak today. I really appreciate it. I thought the talks were great. I've heard a couple people say to me, this is probably the best lineup that you've had since the beginning. They really enjoyed it. I appreciate your willingness to sit in on the panel discussion. It was really productive. I'm real happy with the outcome and your all's willingness to sit down and talk about some issues and things like that. So I appreciate it, and hopefully you guys will keep on coming back. As not necessarily as participants, but as observers and audience members.
Jamie. Can we go now? Can we? Oh, okay. Because. Oh, okay. Well, these lights are really, man, I'm telling you.
All right, well, I'd just like to relay the same thoughts. I'm planned every one of these things out, and I think that this was the first year, one of the things, this is the first year we asked 8 people to speak, and all 8 people accepted. And I think it just shows that, the interest. And by the way, all the speakers are volunteers. None of them are paid. And it's amazing. But I think that it just goes to show the importance of and the need for this forum. So, and it's an amazing amount of work. I fully understand, looking through all the presentations from the past and watching them, how much time it takes and how much we appreciate all of the hard work that you have put into making this a successful day. And I guess we'll adjourn the meeting.
Thanks for everybody who stuck around through the panel discussion.
Yep, and hopefully we'll see you all next year.